So we're going into this 2-month time of more focused practice without so many distractions. It's the plan. It always takes a little while to wind down after the rest of the year. And we're using the 4 establishments of mindfulness for our practice. So this is one of the foundational teachings of the Buddha, to develop sati, mindfulness, presence, clarity, awareness around these 4 aspects of our body and mind. So the first foundation is with the body, the physical body. The second foundation is with feeling tone, pleasant, painful and neutral feeling tone. So we're using these as a foundation for sati, or for mindfulness of presence. The third is mindfulness of the mind, or moods of the mind states. And the fourth is mindfulness of, literally mindfulness of Dhammas. So there's different ways that's interpreted. It can be mindfulness of teachings that the Buddha gave, particular frameworks, but it's more commonly understood as mindfulness of what is going on in your mind. What is the content? Where are the thoughts originating from, or where are they leaning towards, rather? Whether it's towards what is wholesome or what is unwholesome, what is beneficial or unbeneficial. And that's why we have these very special candles burning. I don't know if you noticed them. Because we're starting off with mindfulness of the body, and that gets into, it starts off with being mindful of breathing, the body breathing, and then recognizing the 4 postures, sitting. So when one's sitting, one knows one's sitting. When standing, one knows one's standing. When walking, one knows one's walking. And when laying down, one is mindful that one is laying down. So it's about bringing presence and mindfulness and attention to what is happening in these very simple postures, which are happening all the time. And then it goes into all the bits in between, mindful while stretching, and while extending the limbs and flexing, mindful while eating and drinking, bringing mindfulness to urinating and defecating, bringing mindfulness while going to sleep and while waking up. So the Buddha's encouraging us, all of these very ordinary things we do all the time are opportunities for establishing mindfulness. And then we get into the body parts, which is why we have these candles burning that were given to us by the monks, actually, in Seattle. So mindfulness of the body parts. What's this body made up of? The flesh and the bones and the blood and spittle and all that stuff. So we use that also as a practice to reflect on the nature of this body, what it is, what it's made of. And when we bring our attention to the body in this way, it can be very cooling, very peaceful. So it loses the story of me and mine. You just recognise that, there's skin and flesh and bones here, and all the stuff inside, and it gets very peaceful. So reflect on the body in that way. Fears around the body just sort of fall away, at least for some time. Desires fall away for some time at least. And if it's really cultivated and developed, they can fall away completely. And then another reflection is on the 4 elements, that the body is made up of the 4 great elements: earth, water, fire and air. And there's this invitation to reflect, just as there are 4 elements internally here, this body is made up of earth, water, fire and air. So the bodies outside here are also made up of earth, water, fire and air. So then, and then we reflect inside, it's like this, outside it's like that, same. Inside, outside, it's not so different. So this breaks down the sense of me and other, and the strong sense of difference that we can experience between ourselves and others, and liking and not liking, or fearing or desiring. So it breaks this down, and it makes things very simple and peaceful. There's just this play of the elements going on here, and it's going on out there too, in bodies, in the whole planet, the whole universe actually. It's right, well, maybe that's not true, I don't know, about water, but let's just stay with planet Earth. Planet Earth and the four elements. So these are ways of contemplating that the Buddha recommends. And then the last aspect of body contemplation is going through the stages of decomposition of a corpse. Something one doesn't normally think about. And so it's a systematic practice of looking at the process that happens naturally. It doesn't often happen these days for human beings, because we have, there are so many of us, I guess, and then we have these processes that either we are buried or burned, or now we can get composted. And there's various ways these can happen, but it's rare, it's almost unheard of these days that, particularly in the West, say in America, that a body would be able to go through the natural process of that a body goes through, that you may have seen with an animal, a wild animal perhaps. If you live in the countryside, you can see that sometimes. So there's this natural process that's a little bit scary at times, a little bit repulsive, and bloating, and I won't go through the whole thing actually, but it goes through all of these different kind of rather intense processes, and then it ends up with just a skeleton held together with sinews, and then no longer held together with sinews, and then the bones scattered around here and there, and then even the bones themselves break down and go back to the earth if left to their own devices. So this is a really interesting practice to do, and it's helpful to do it with listening to a kind of a guided step-by-step process of these steps. And it's interesting to see at what point do we let go of the sense of I and mine, if we're reflecting on that with this body, with our body, because the sense of me and mine is so deep, so deeply rooted. But our body is going to go back to the earth just like every other body that's lived and died. So it's a very interesting practice. You get to see, is there a letting go as soon as the breath leaves the body, or is it, somewhere down the line? And the first time I did this as a guided practice, I imagined that I would leave, I'd be kind of okay to let go of this body pretty early on in that process. But what actually happened was, it wasn't until the bones were no longer held together with sinews and were scattered, right the way all that way down the process, long way down the process of decay. It wasn't until the skeleton was no longer actually a skeleton that my mind could let go of. There was nothing to hold on to that I could say that's me. So it's interesting how deep those patterns go of identification and attachment. And the reality is, we're borrowing this. The four elements are coming together for a while here, and doing their thing, and they're going to break up at some point, naturally. It's meant to be that way. Reform into other forms in nature. So the first foundation of mindfulness is exploring the body in these ways as a support for understanding and letting go of the sense of I, me and mine. It helps us to be more attuned to reality, the real one, the big one, big reality, true reality. So that's the first foundation of mindfulness, which we're in at the moment, we're exploring at the moment in our retreat. And then the second foundation is around feeling tone, which is a very interesting and important exploration. So feeling tone, we're experiencing feeling all the time. So the Buddha gives this simile, so we're getting into the sort of gruesome stuff today, but the Buddha gives this simile. He says that we are like a flayed cow at a crossroads, that we're like that's still alive, and we feel every fly, every bit of sun, wind. We feel everything. We're very sensitive, and it's a kind of gross image that he uses, but it's like, yeah, ouch, And so, learning how to know what we're feeling. So when we feel pleasant feeling, can we just know that without, more of that. And when we feel painful feeling, can we just know that, this is painful feeling, this is uncomfortable or painful, without, I've got to get rid of it, I've got to do something about it now. Can we just know it? And then, with wisdom, we can still respond. We don't have to hurt ourselves or anything like that. But not to immediately react. And with neutral feeling, that which is hard to feel. The areas, maybe if you just bring your attention below the neck right now, down to the ground, if there are any areas that you can't really notice, nothing in particular feeling, that's a neutral feeling tone. So a lot of our experience is neutral, actually. And then we ignore it, we skip over it, we just distract ourselves. So learning how to know these three kinds of feeling tone as they are. And then the Buddha points to these underlying tendencies. So the underlying tendency to pleasant feeling is greed. So if we're not watching, greed will come in very easily and just like more of that, more of that, more of that, more of that. The underlying tendency to painful feeling is aversion. Get rid of it. Stop immediately. And the underlying tendency to neutral feeling is ignorance. Ignorance, ignoring. So that's in some ways the hardest one to catch. So can start with the other two. And then getting to know the moods of the mind. So sometimes people are surprised and they don't really understand when you say moods of the mind. Moods of the mind? What's that? But actually we all experience moods. Some days when the mind is really uplifted and bright and open, clear. Sometimes it feels really heavy and dull. Sometimes it's very contracted, maybe fearful and contracted. Sometimes it's really open. Sometimes, knowing the mind, and it's actually the Buddha starts off with these very clear examples. Knowing that the mind filled with lust is filled with lust, and the mind without lust is without lust. The mind filled with aversion is filled with aversion, and the mind without aversion is without aversion. The mind with delusion is filled with delusion, and the mind without delusion is without delusion. So, starting to know, starting to get to know what's happening here. Because when we don't know the moods of the mind, then it's just like we become the mood. We think it's who and what we are, and we see the world. The world becomes the mood of our mind. We see everything through that lens. But if we know it for what it is, then it's just that. And it's okay, that's the lens that's, maybe the mind's filled with lust. Okay, we're seeing through that lens right now. Be careful, It can following that can get us into complicated situations. or if the mind's very, very heavy and dull, then and then we know that. If we don't know it and we just think, oh, I'm so miserable, everything's so terrible, then we think that the world is the mood of our mind. But if we know that it's a mood, it's much lighter, because we know that moods change. It's not everything. So getting to know the moods of the mind, and seeing when the mind is, sometimes the mind is really bright and open and expansive and beautiful. And just to know that too, not to think, oh, now I've become enlightened, or whatever, now I've really got it, this is what I want to keep this forever. All moods change. It's just the way of things. So as we develop the third foundation of mindfulness, or a third establishment, mindfulness of mind, we also get to see the changing nature of mind. It changes all the time. And then the last of the four is, depending on what your source is, actually different scriptures have slightly different or somewhat different combinations here. But it's basically pointing to what is the content of your mind, and are your thoughts, are they motivated by the five hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry and doubt? Or are they influenced by the 7 awakening factors? Mindfulness, curiosity, sustaining energy, joy, calming, collectedness, equanimity, any of those. And then there are other groups of mind states that are also listed. But it's basically, which direction is the mind leaning towards? Is it towards just getting more and more caught up in things, or is it towards more clarity and balance? So these are establishments of mindfulness, and they're with what is happening here and now. So those four, when you read through the whole thing, it's like, well, there's not much left out. It's like covering pretty much everything that we experience. And the Buddha is saying these are opportunities to establish mindfulness. Even a lustful mind or a mind of ill will, even we're caught up in a mind of ill will. Not that that's to be cultivated. It's not great, But then we know it. Oh, okay, this is ill will. Or I'm caught up in fear. Or I really want things to be different, or whatever it is. And so then we see that for what it is, and we can recognize it for what it is. And truth is, things are as they are. Whether we like it or we don't like it, things are as they are. And we can do things to influence the way things are. We each have a life that we're meant to, live and bring to this world, and what we do with our body, speech and mind matters. And it'll be different for each of us what we choose to do with this life process. And also what we can do. We have different abilities and strengths, weaknesses. So I really want to encourage you all, and us all, all of us here, to remember that it's possible, whatever may be going on, it's possible to recognize one of those foundations of mindfulness and use that as a way to settle your attention with this, with whatever may be happening here and now. And sometimes we feel like we can't because it feels difficult, and we feel upset, and we're feeling agitated. And so if that's the case, you can just remember, like, oh yeah, agitated. That's an unpleasant feeling tone. I don't like it. And it's like this. And then we can recognize, okay, then what's the mind doing with that? Maybe it's contracted, it's agitated. And then is it just falling into thoughts of ill will, thoughts of hopelessness, or even thoughts of harm? Or can you bring mindfulness and maybe some calming the body, calming the mind, settling? This is a skillful thing to do. These are qualities of awakening and awakeness. So, whatever may be going on here, if we can bring mindfulness to it, it becomes food, fuel or fuel for the path. And if we're not mindful and we're just caught up, then we just are part of the spinning of this world, the confusion, the troubledness of this world. So we have an opportunity. I always feel like once we come across the Dhamma, we've had a little bit of practice, we sort of have a responsibility in a way to kind of show up and not just fall into the old habits of despondency or anger or desire or whatever it might be that we have, but to recognize those tendencies and to rise up, to see how do I bring mindfulness to this? What is going on here? How do I need to respond to this internally? So that we can find a place of centeredness, of presence here, from which to respond to life, from which to live. So this is really, really beneficial, hugely beneficial for just living a skillful life, really, and also it does lead to greater presence. So the more we cultivate these establishments of mindfulness, the more presence we experience here, and the more that we're present, then the more clarity, the more brightness, the more we can show up. Ultimately, the more we can let go. It's a liberating process. So there's these 4 establishments of mindfulness, when developed and cultivated, lead to ultimately can lead to full liberation. So it's not a sort of it's a practice that can be done on a light level, and it can be really deepened to a liberating practice.